Bueno, bienvenidas y bienvenidos. Esta es la sesión de inspiración número 2 del año 2023. Hoy vamos a hablar de blog booking en Canadá y tenemos dos invitados que son canadienses, que hablan en inglés, entonces empezaremos la conversación en inglés. Decirles a los que están viendo, hay la opción de agregar subtítulos. Se pueden poner los subtítulos en español y bueno, lo único es que le vamos a pedir a nuestros invitados que hablen lento para que esto pueda funcionar en caso de que haya algo que no entiendan. So, welcome Kerry, Clarke, welcome Michael to this conversation. I'm very happy to have you both here. To speak about
Ayer fue un día todo desanimada.
to speak about blog booking models in Canada. So Kerry Clarke is the artistic and marketing director of the 44-year post-folk Calgary Folk Music Festival. She's also the blog hitter and off-season concert series. She's on several non-profit art boards, has served on many arts juries, is part of WRAD, co-founded the Rwanda Kigali Up Festival, and hosts weekly radio programs on CQUA and CJSW when she's not traveling to conferences and festivals to see music from a vast range of genders. And also, welcome, Kerry. Thank you for being with us, for being today with us. And also, let me introduce you to Michael Owen. He has a music agency, but he's also a musician. Michael is a Juno Award nominee producer. Juno is, you can speak about that, but that's like prizes, right, from Canada for the Canadian industry. A producer, composer, and musician. He has been part of a music entrepreneur for over 20 years. He has toured in Canada, the USA, Mexico, and Europe, and worked with international partners on worldwide records releases and marketing campaigns. In 2011, Michael created Made with Pencil Crayons, a company providing administrative production and marketing support to various Canadian projects in the music industry. And in 2020, Michael also founded Trade Routes, a nonprofit to help facilities industry develop an international cooperation. So welcome both of you to this conversation. Perhaps I would like to start with Kerry. And if you can tell us a little bit of history of how and why the Calgary Folk Festival started to work together with other festivals in Canada. And you are muted.
So this is being translated because my Spanish is quite rudimentary.
Yes. Bueno, everyone, it's okay speaking in English. And we have also activated subtitles for the conversation. So okay, if you speak slowly, the artificial intelligence will work much better.
Okay, discúlpeme por mi español muy malo. Well, there are some Canadian festivals. There's a Canadian festival model that our festival is part of. We're called folk music festivals, but what that means really is not so much about the music, because when people hear folk, they sometimes think just singer-songwriters and Celtic music. What it is they're mostly outdoor festivals. They're multi-generational, very egalitarian, where people set up tarps and blankets, multi-staged artists from around the world. So that's what we mean by folk festivals. And I think that there was some similarities. We're all separate and not for profit, But because we have things in common, for instance, not just on programming, but the fact that we have a large volunteer groups that help put on the festival, that we tend to feed our volunteers and artists and look after our artists, then there were a lot of similarities. So I think we naturally talked to each other to compare notes and best practices. And so programming was part of that. There were also the Harbourfront Festival in Toronto, which is a very different model. They benefited a lot from from collaboration because they happened over several weekends in the summer. So they had natural affinities with other festivals for programming that went both north-south and east-west. So I think in a lot of ways, some of the collaboration that initially happened was instigated by Derek Andrews out of Harbourfront when he was there. And so then there were a group of festivals, Harbourfront, the Winnipeg Folk Festival, Edmonton, Vancouver, Calgary, that were all booking at a certain level with relatively budgets that were high enough to bring in international artists. So there was a sort of a network developed then where we would meet every fall and compare notes and talk about artists that we might want to share and that we might want to help with some grants. So that's how it initially started. And then there's another network with which you referred to, which is WRAD, which stands for Western Roots Artistic Directors. And that was again started by somebody that just thought, let's all get together. We are all unique and special, we would say, which is kind of funny because we discovered that we were all unique and special in our own ways. And so we got together and again compared notes, talked about programming, boards of directors, marketing, best practices. So that's kind of how it started, was some affinities and the feeling that sometimes you're isolated and that you need to talk to people about not only sharing artists, but how much are you paying artists? How do you get a tax waiver? How do you deal with immigration? So those were some of the touch points and kind of how it started, and then it's evolved and devolved in different ways as we've gone along in the process.
Thank you, Kerry. And can you tell us a little bit, how do you work within these networks? How are you organized? Like how many times do you meet a year? Kind of driving us on a daily basis, how this, like, at least the Calgary Folk Festival is, or with other networks you are related.
It's kind of loose. It's a little disorganized, and it tends to be, we meet, our Western Roots Artistic Directors meet once a year in a locale, and we tend to just have a couple of days of meetings and talk to each other. And then we communicate with each other over Facebook. So sometimes we'll say, hey, I'm working with this artist from Mexico and they're looking at applying for a grant, and is anyone else interested? We've tried spreadsheets over the years and with limited success. And we also go to the Mundial conference once a year, and that's in Montreal. And there's something called the World Roots Network, and they're trying to get organized. And again, there have been spreadsheets over the years where different people have taken the lead and said, here's this artist that's available, here's their ballpark fee, who's interested. Quite often it stalls. I think we all get so busy. We're all pitched so many artists, and then we all get so busy that we don't do a great job of following up. It depends if, like I took a lead on a grant for Buen Rostro, who are a Mexican group that we saw last year at the Gerando conference. And so I then became kind of a pseudo agent and reached out, along with some help, but reached out to different festivals and got them on board, collected the contracts, did the grant. So it tends to be sometimes single artist based, and you get to know who are your colleagues that maybe are east-west or north-south. Someone like Chris Freyer in Winnipeg probably does a lot more outreach than I do, just because his festival overlaps with, they've got more natural partners. And so he's again talking mostly one-on-one to festivals north, south, and east, west that are at the similar time. So a lot of it's relatively informal and just based on networks and communications. So like I say, it's fairly informal. You know, there's a new artistic Vancouver Folk Festival, for instance, wasn't going to happen this year, and now it's happening. So the person who was doing the booking reached out to me and several other artistic directors, and I sent her the list of who I'd hired and sent her some suggestions. And for instance, was familiar with an African artist that was touring this summer that I would have really liked to book, but had already finished. And so let her know about it. So a lot of it's just sort of ongoing communications and networking. We haven't had a very formal system. And the meetings between us and Vancouver and Edmonton and Harbourfront, they probably fizzled out about 10 years ago. So we don't have a really great system. A lot of it is just one-to-one and sometimes group conversations depending on the artist and the situation. So I have to say that we don't have a great system. Probably the best system, and Michael will talk more because he's got some very good systems, but you know, in the States, they have a network that meets, that deals with festivals in the fall. The jazz festivals in Canada, I believe, meet still annually and do quite a bit of block booking. They sometimes get frustrated because they may champion a number of artists that are going to play across their jazz festivals, and then they get frustrated because sometimes they don't get the Canada Council grant, so the tour falls apart. It's easier for them to collaborate because the jazz festivals in Canada tend to happen over a 10-day or 2-week period. So you could easily say somebody plays Calgary one day and Saskatoon the next and Winnipeg the following. Whereas it's a bit tougher for us because our festivals happen on weekends. So, you know, someone could look from outside and think, wow, I'm going to tour the Canadian festivals. And when I go to Womex and I talk to people, they get very excited about doing the Canadian circuit. But then they look at a map and go, oh, Canada is pretty huge. And they can't, what are they going to do with the weekend between, what are they going to do during the week between Calgary and Vancouver? So, I know I'm putting up some roadblocks, but Canada's a very tough country to tour, and it's very huge. And the festivals happen on weekends, and there aren't a lot of great plays during the week. So probably the best networks I've seen happen more in the States and with the jazz festivals. Cautionary tale, we're a cautionary tale, but we make some things work.
Fantastic, Kerry. Well, I want to give the voice now to Michael Owen. And perhaps, Michael, can you start explaining what is Trade Routes? How do you start it? And what's like the goal you have? Well, what's the goal of Trade Routes? And then, yeah.
Well, so hello, mucho gusto a todos. My name is Michael Owen. I'm from in Canada, Trade Routes, and so I started it just a bit out of necessity, because as I would tour internationally, I saw wonderful cooperations like RAD has and other groups, but many were excluded from that, and not on purpose. It's just for circumstances that Kerry has already sort of highlighted. And so I just sort of saw a need of people to connect. And I was mentored by Derek Andrews for many years, and Kerry mentioned he was a catalyst for cooperation at Harbourfront Center for a couple of decades, and so I learned a lot of this from him, and sort of how to bring people together and what makes it work. But I started it really just out of necessity, to help remove some risk and to build some infrastructure to facilitate sustainable careers for artists and arts workers. It can be feast or famine, and when you don't have anything to do on Sunday to Thursday, it's quite expensive to bridge those weekends. And so, yeah, it would be great if there was a more robust system to help presenters like Kerry bring in artists, so it's not so difficult or not so much of a risk, and there is a little bit of a weekday network that one can turn to do school opportunities or community events or things like that. So yeah, this is really the catalyst of what got it started, out of a need or necessity.
And can you tell us now what's the job that you do at TradeWorks? What have you been working, especially in terms of doing this research on block booking models and consortiums? If you can also explain like if there is a difference about these wordings.
Well, I think every network is different, and again, Kerry highlighted some of these. They all operate somewhat differently, whether it's a theater network or a summer festival network or even a venues network. I convened a bit of a focus group with 4 Americans and 4 Canadians, and had a few meetings to talk about this process. And I would call them the consummate cooperators. They already did international cooperation with other partners, and so we tried to develop a needs assessment document to understand the best practices on how to move through this process, because there are functioning and successful networks out there, but again, each of them operate somewhat differently, yet experience similar challenges. And so I just wanted to sort of assess that marketplace, and Kerry brought up the Midwest Consortium is a really great network in September in the US. A bunch of, they're not actually Midwest presenters, there's a bunch of non-Midwest presenters in there, but like-minded folks that have events in September that do cooperate, and they were again started out of need by a couple of festivals, the Chicago World Music Festival and the Lotus Fest. And these founders are still kicking around. And so I invited them to a group to talk about this and how they've gone through this experience over the last 20 years to develop sort of rules of engagement. And so we did that, and we have a sort of a set of procedures to go through and to follow if you want to try to conduct block booking meetings. And then we also got some funding from Canada Council to develop a digital tool that would enable some information sharing privately amongst presenters. And so, not to disparage it, but it's a glorified spreadsheet, right? Like it's a nice interface that you could look at and review artist data, which you can get from a spreadsheet. And a lot of networks use spreadsheets. This is why I poke fun. But what did come out of the focus group is many people are tired of looking at spreadsheets. We all look at spreadsheets all day for our budgets and our lineups and everything else. And so when you're in an artistic sort of mindset, getting away from a spreadsheet is not necessarily a bad thing. And so that was one takeaway, that they wanted a better way to interact with the content that's being presented to them within the network. It was one anecdotal takeaway, but like I said, we did come up with these rules and procedures, and did get a bit of a needs assessment out of that on how to cooperate, and each talked to many networks on how they operated. And how they functioned, and I continue to do that to speak with presenters on how they cooperate and they do or don't. And it's different in every country, region.
And bueno, I have many questions, but about that, perhaps we can speak up. If you can go deeper on this, what should be the set of rules to be or to develop a network?
I can share what we've put together, but there's a voting system. I'm not sure how Kerry does it, but many use some type of voting system. 1, 2, 3. I'm interested. I'm not interested, or maybe I would book them if they're routed, or 100% I'm going to put in an offer. And then as some networks would attribute points to each one of those, and then when an artist would reach a certain number of points, then it would enable some communication. Some networks will facilitate logistics. Like they'll actually make a group offer. So like, 5 or 6 or 6 or 8 people come together. Instead of paying $10,000, you're going to pay $7,500 each, and they get 10 shows instead of 5 shows at $10,000. So it's like, people, it's a way to save money. Of course, it makes it more economical for the artist. It's a way to leverage the marketing efforts and the play into the marketplace. So it's a win-win for everybody. Maybe aside from the artists, get a little bit less money, but they get more opportunity, and they can make more money on profile building and merchandise, and returning to the marketplace as an example would be another big win, right? But then some of them don't. Like some just like, oh, hey, we had this meeting, and here are the 5 presenters that liked your stuff. Go figure it out. Which is also helpful. So it just depends on how that organization or block booking process wanted to support its group.
Great, thank you, Michael. Kerry, can you tell us about how do you choose artists, perhaps, in your network, or if you have like established some set of rules, perhaps non-written rules, in the experience that you might have?
Well, we don't really choose as a group. So we don't have a group way of choosing where somebody gets a certain number of points or somebody, there's the interest. It's more really about somebody championing them. Like if there's a group that I'm interested in, it's more about me almost becoming a pseudo agent and talking to my colleagues. And then the choices are similar to other artistic choices. Like there may be a festival, like for instance, a Sunfest in Ontario hires, mostly international artists. And so they may have a few more. Someone like us, we may hire, 15 out of 70 artists every year, maybe not from North America. And although Mexico's in North America, we might include them as international. So there may only be 15 spots. So I may have a separate decision about why I choose somebody than Chris Frere might in Winnipeg. It might be that I have a theme that year. Might be that it often starts with the artist just being really interesting to us and then us finding a spot for them. And then once you find a spot for that artist, that's one less spot for someone else. So some of it is, I always say it's an art and a science, and the art part is this group really wonderful? Do they fit our programming? Are we able to program them? The 25-piece Balkan group, too many people. And we all probably know, I'd love to know more about the people here, but I'm sure you've all experienced that you just can't do that. So no matter how many dates they have, I can't stage them, can't pay for hotel rooms for them. So it's about, people pitching us and us choosing the artists. And then sometimes when there's a collaboration, it happens by coincidence, and sometimes it's by design. So the coincidence part is, Chris Frere and I and someone from Vancouver, we're all pitched the same artists and we love them and we all say yes. And we say, wow, they have a tour now. But that's more the agent putting it together. And the design is more, like if I go to a conference, and Chris and I went to Gerando and we wanted to make sure we brought one artist at least, and we brought Ben Rostro. I applied for a Canada Council grant. We got the money. That's a good path. That's the good success. Chris Frere went to the festival conference in Korea and suggested a group and talked to all of us, and we trusted him. The failure side, I went to a conference in Colombia, and I saw Camilo Torres, who I think is incredible. And I tried so hard to get colleagues on board, and it just didn't work out. Even some colleagues who had promised them they were booking them. So I just made it happen on my own. So the process of, that's a long answer to the process of choosing is not very much group based. It's not like the jazz festivals where they kind of say, here's so-and-so who's available and put up your hand if you're interested and how much you can pay. And, it's interesting because there's some festivals in Canada in the fall now in February, and some of them are called it's called Winterruption, and there's a network of them. And it was interesting because I think it's hard to decide, because everyone has a different reality. So they may have an artist that's available, but for instance, Regina Folk Fest is going to book something more rootsy than Winterruption in Edmonton, which is going to be more indie rock. And so it seems like it's hard sometimes to say who's on board. And then you almost need a full-time staff person to do the negotiations, which is where I can see my friend there. That Michael will speak to that, because the follow-up with everyone and getting them committed. And, I've had some very big frustrations with some colleagues where they've said, yes, they're interested. And then I can't get a hold of them. And I'm thinking, how do agents get hold of these people? And it's that, commitment to not commitment and how much money. And it's a challenge. I'm not offering a lot of solutions. I'm offering more roadblocks than solutions. I'm sorry.
If I could jump in, no, Kerry's offering great solutions, and this is actually what came out of the group, and when we came together to develop these set of rules, the artist champion or the presenter champion is key, and it's the only way an artist gets into the network, because otherwise it dilutes the network, and you need that champion, because Kerry touched on another thing: trust. Trust is key. I'm going to speak for Kerry. You trust Chris's opinion, artistic opinion, his taste. You know, and so you're able to rely on him when he says, "Hey, that's a great band from Korea. We should all work together to bring that in." And I think that's a really important point. But then also lastly is the full-time staff person. This is a major takeaway. From every single network we talked about, there needs to be a full-time outreach person that actually manages this and drives it forward, pushes the meetings, make sure our presenters are submitting their artists for consideration if they want to champion someone. There needs to be a network coordinator. It's paramount. It's more important. It is the most important digital tool. You don't even need the digital tool because you can use a spreadsheet. But you need the person for sure.
Thank you, Michael and Kerry. And I was also wondering about those tools, about building this network, about building trust. What can you say about that? Because Michael, you are building a tool. And Kerry, perhaps you can also tell us, well, yes, what tools have worked for you? And yeah, so what can you say that it's helpful or have been proven helpful, or perhaps something that you need that you're still lacking to work successfully, or at least work better in these networks?
Well, the tools are only as good as the people using them. So like Michael set up tools, and you know, so far I've been meaning to have him come and speak at a RAD meeting and see if we can adopt it, but we haven't yet. I think you know, Google Sheets can be useful. They have good information. Are people using them? You know, there's the World Roots Network has one, and after Mondial, some people filled some things out. I haven't looked at it in months. It'd be interesting if someone had the analysis to look at it and see what the interest was and what the follow-up was. You know, I think there's some, like the ones who got Canada Council grants, like Buen Rostro and Batuco. That's a different thing. I mean, I'm personally a big spreadsheet person. I love my Excel spreadsheets for everything from doing radio shows to booking. And also to programming, because we do our collaborative sessions. So I'm a big Excel spreadsheet person, or Google spreadsheets or whatever. We use Airtable here for a lot of our organization. I think of it kind of like a better, more pretty Excel spreadsheet. So we find that useful. But like I say, the tools are only as good as people who use them, and everyone using the same one. And I think we're all just swamped, and we're busy enough booking our own festivals and working with who we work with. Like I say, it's hard to force Chris Freyer to work with someone new when he's already got something established. Yeah, so.
Thank you, Kerry. But well, Michael, can you try to explain your tool and what do you think it's useful, or try to what sort of roadblocks do you think you are going to turn around?
Well, I think that the tool is, as Kerry said, I have to reiterate, his tool is as useful as much time you put into it. And so if if a coordinator decides to work at whatever network, I think the challenges they have is buy-in from the network, availability of time of presenters. But I think the advantage of it is an easy way to share information. And so, because people don't have a lot of time, and if there is a coordinator to push the network forward and to, harvest new artists and give the presenters options for programming, like viable options for programming that their peers they trust are already programming or already interested in. The purpose of it is to streamline the communication. So so people like Kerry know what other people are programming, and they don't have to reach out and ask for a list or that. Like, it's just an easy way to either get a notification or something, right? There are, and then the other advantage would be to connecting to networks beyond that particular spot. If a presenter has all year round programming, then they can connect with other people that program at that period of time, and not just in the summer or in September, and vice versa for the theater scene. Like, and out of the focus group, the hardest thing to bring together is the difference. And Kerry outlined this, is that one marketplace is different than another marketplace, or the audience is different, or the venue is different, or the presenter's capability is different. So squaring that circle is a major hurdle. And I found the only way to do that is to make the network bigger, have more options for the smaller people to cooperate, have more options for the bigger people to cooperate. But again, coming back to trust, it's difficult to build a large network of trust, and in-person meetings and retreats and fun times at conferences and kayaking and sightseeing helps. It truly does.
Thank you, Michael. Well, I would like to open the conversation with the rest of the audience. If someone has a question they want to raise or to ask, or a comment, if while people perhaps ask something, Michael and Kerry, what can you mention of, like, what do work, not more than just digital tools, but like for networks to build, to open, to build trust. If you can tell me more about like this, the importance of the meeting in person, or other strategies, what can you tell us about?
I'd love to hear from other people, like questions they have, and also experiences, because I imagine that we've got things to learn from everyone on the call too. And I'd be really curious to know what everyone does. I know we don't have tons of time for everyone to go through all their things, but I'm really interested in who's here, because I want to expand our networks beyond Canada and internationally. And so I would love to know more about what everyone's doing in their realities, and like I say, they probably have some things to teach us as well. It's all about collaboration, and the more of these conversations we can have cross borders, the better.
Bueno, si alguien tiene una pregunta o tiene algún comentario, también lo puede hacer en español y yo con mucho gusto les ayudo a traducir.
I will ask in Spanish. Pablo, can you translate, please? Because
Claro, of course.
va a ser más fácil para mí. Hi, and thank you. Kerry habló de picheo, de situación de picheo para recibir propuestas a sus festivales en red, y no me queda claro si esa situación de picheo ocurre en las conferences o si es que tienen estipulado un sistema desde donde ellos reciben propuestas. Supongo que muchos de los que estamos acá, además de productores de festivales, somos personas intentando buquear artistas latinoamericanos en el norte del continente. ¿Se entendió la pregunta?
Sí, básicamente es cómo hacer un pitch, ¿no? Cómo ella puede recibir un pitch. So, bueno, sí, perhaps to Kerry, because Michael, you are not really a presenter, but Kerry, bueno, Cecilia, she's from Córdoba, Argentina, and she represents a group of industry professionals in the region. She has done amazing things with the power of community. They have developed a music export office for the region of Córdoba, and she has her question is very specific in terms of pitching. Sending you a pitch, where do you receive a pitch? How do you like to receive a pitch? Is it in a conference? Is it via email?
The best is if you are in a conference with somebody, because then you have a touch point, and gets through some of the, you know, it's a higher level communication. But if you not, I mean, email is kind of the only way you can get in touch with someone. We get hundreds of emails, thousands of emails, but it doesn't hurt. It's better than not getting in touch. But if you're getting in touch, you know, there's some important things, and that's the header of the email for me. So it's the group name, because if you put the header in as Calgary Folk Music Festival, then that's just gets buried. And then making something very clear and concise. So it's, you know, who the group is, what the group sounds like, keep the words simple. What's their best song, a video that really shows who they are. And then keeping in mind that, you know, is it realistic for them to tour? You know, even when we meet somebody at a conference and they say, oh, my band wants to play Canada. Well, yes, of course they do, because that's why you're meeting with us and that's why you're at the conference. But have they played the region first? Are they experienced? Are they ready to tour internationally? And if they are, do they have supports? Because in the, you know, everyone's dream scenario is that you send me an email and I say, yes, I want your group, and I'm paying them a very good fee and I'm flying them from Argentina. And then from there, they can play other shows. But it's so rare that it works that way. It's more likely that, you know, if you can tell me that they have a couple of dates already in Canada and that the date that you have is free with around our dates, or you're already in North America, you have to start with something that's realistic. And like I say, I think that you should start in the region and then build that region. And then as they get more ready to play internationally, so don't just do a sort of a carpet bombing method of trying to get a hold of people, because it's rare that something is going to fly. It's best to be organized and intentional about how you're contacting people. So that's the long answer to, yes, you could send me an email, but it's kind of like throwing, I don't know, birdseed into the wind or something in terms of the likelihood of success. But if you're at a conference and you've had an artist play, and then you're following up, and at least somebody can see that artist, and that there's an infrastructure. And I think a lot of what Pablo's trying to help build is an infrastructure with the support. And if you're coming through an organization that has that, that's a lot better than sort of being on your own and, like I say, throwing a bunch of birdseed into the wind, hoping that one bird will actually grab a bite.
Thank you, Kerry, for that long answer. We are all taking notes on this. And actually I want to give a little bit of light of an example that you mentioned of Buen Rostro. Buen Rostro is a Mexican band that was on a showcase where Kerry was invited in the state of Tabasco. Tabasco is like a region of Mexico a little bit forgotten, and a group of people organized a music conference and invited Kerry and Chris from Canada. So that's how, like, actually they met Mexican artists, they saw them live, and they established this connection. So now Buen Rostro is on tour. Or will be participating at the Calgary Folk Festival, and I'm imagining at some other shows in Canada, thanks to this connection with Calgary. And I'm very happy that you mentioned that, Kerry, about your interest of connecting with Latin America or with other regions, because that's also our interest of everyone here, and make those connections. That's also a conversation we have been talking and advancing with Michael, and we'll be very happy to see that happen. And for example, this is a comment for the network, that perhaps if we get together as a group and then have like this connections, and with time and resources, we can perhaps find some like highways of making exchanges in both directions between Canada and Latin America. Perhaps anyone has an additional question or comment. I want to ask you both, Kerry and Michael, if there is any model of network where you put like together a funding available, or like you pay like a sort of a fee to co-produce or be part of, or if how these networks are financially supported.
Michael, this is you. Because our network isn't financially supported. It's just really ad hoc and depends on the leadership of some people. So there is no financial support. I mean, there are grants that are available for tours, but again, it has to be somebody taking the lead on it. So yeah, I'm not familiar with any financial support, but Michael, you have some.
Yeah, so I think it would depend from organization to organization on how it gets funded. But you know, I think we know that in Canada we're quite lucky. We do have government funding available, and there's federal funding and provincial funding that supports aspects of what Trade Routes does, and through some of the presenter funding, we get some support. I know of the other networks. It depends on where they live, like where that network is, sort of who the parent organization is. Because typically what I've seen is most networks are a program or a component of a larger organization. I think of Capicoa as an example, as a national performing arts organization here in Canada, and they have a networks program within their association. It's an association. As does, there's another one in Quebec called Rideau, again, another association who runs a block booking network in their association. Another one in the province of Ontario, same thing, again, in the theater world, association, and gets support through their association funding to run this program within the umbrella of their organization. So I'm not sure that helps internationally. But yeah, and I have seen some of these, like the Mundial as an example. So that's a network that's supported within a conference, and this also does happen as well. Within an event, there's a sub-event to support.
Can you explain more about that? The Mundial, he's referring to Mundial Montreal, a music conference happening in the city of Montreal.
Yes. Well, FinPro does a similar meeting of presenters, festivals across Latin America. I've been in touch with Ana Rodriguez and Sergio about this. And back in 2019, I attended actually one of these meetings. Yeah, so it seems like they were also interested to develop this. And of course, it's a good time to do this. And I've done this where we mentioned earlier where I held lunches with a bunch of presenters. Kerry, I actually think attended one of them. And then there are other networks that do the same thing. Jazz Festivals Canada here, they used to hold a lunch and a meeting adjacent to a conference. So they would all attend a conference and then hold a meeting next to it.
Okay. See, so perhaps any other comment or questions from the audience? Max, Pavel, or Carolina, Danny, Luis. While that, sí.
Pablo, thanks.
Sí.
I just want to give you thanks for sharing this experience and the work you do in Canada. I'm listening what Kerry say about important to attend a conference, for example, when you want to touring or do a presentation in Canada, if you are band or group in Latin America. Sometimes people don't understand that it's important to attend this conference or trying to stay in touch with these networks. So thanks for sharing. For example, Kerry, that for you it's important to meet people in conference or meet the project because that give us to us, for example, in my case, I'm manager, but I'm producer. I do different things in this industry, but it's important that you share how you work, right? Because that give us ideas how to organize our work. That's all.
De nada.
No problema, sí.
Gracias, gracias, Caro. Well, I have an additional question or comment, Michael and Kerry. Michael, you were talking about before we start this conversation about those people or those profile of people that do not attend conferences that will be important to be part of these ecosystems. Can you go deeper on that? Like, how do you envision, like, who are these people missing, or who would be the key people as well participating in the network? Like, of course, we need presenters because we need artists and presenters, that's for sure. But in the middle or in the surroundings, what other profiles can be useful to have in the networks?
Well, we say presenter, and well, I guess what we're really referring to are festivals and like theaters or venues, mostly theaters. But there are venues and there are independent promoters that are sort of left outside of this. And I think Kerry touched on this at the beginning. About the folk music concept, and where maybe not everybody's in the folk music genre, but they have this ethos of cooperation and sharing and supporting one another. And this can be absent in the commercial world or in the I guess the people I'm saying that are excluded, the venues, the mainstream sort of genres, I guess, and so they historically have been less cooperative, sharp elbows, and understandably, like I understand why, but it's breaking down those barriers and trying to include those folks, because those are the ones that, or those small presenters, pardon me, in the smaller towns that don't travel to the national conferences. In the theater world, there's in US anyway, there's the top tier APAP, the National Theater Conference, but there are several six other regional conferences that are equally as important in those regions, and a lot of the smaller presenters don't go to New York because it's not relevant to them. It's more relevant for them to connect with their regional community, and so they end up at these regional conferences. And so that's I think a robust network that we rely on when touring artists internationally. It's great to get the festivals on the weekends or these institutional presenters at Kennedy Center or Lincoln Center or whomever on board. But you need, we talked about this earlier, the Sunday to Thursday dates. And I know some presenters that specifically target these dates. Like I worked with one in Philadelphia where they would have a Latin party on a Monday night. And it was packed because in that community, that was one of the nights that the Latin community was available, and to sort of go out, and he knew that he could get a band cheap because they're doing tours on Friday and Saturdays, and so those days are days that they're usually off, and so if he can supply him hotel and a couple of grand, yeah, it's not an anchor fee, but it certainly it pays the band and covers their expenses and helps. So it's those types of smaller presenters or promoters, like the layer sort of below the institutional presenter. And some of these are DJs, and they throw parties, and they, the community organizers, these are potent, a kind of untapped folks. I had a participated in producing an Eastern European conference. Kerry actually came down to present on a panel and attend the conference. And there are a series of presenters there that were not really connected to the scene, so to speak. Like they don't travel to conferences. They're not really in any network. Frankly, they didn't know these networks existed. And so this was a targeted conference to engage with this community, because it's a large community in Canada, and there is a network there, and it's underutilized. And so we were trying to expose them to sort of how professionals like Kerry operate at international level and cooperate, so that they could use this more at a micro level when they're even just touring regional artists. Doesn't have to be international artists. It's just an opportunity to cooperate within their own community of usually genre or culturally specific.
For me, there's two things. One is with something like the RAD network, because it's a large network and there are some really big and small festivals, and a lot of very small festivals, very community based, that sometimes these aren't their full-time jobs, so they're not going to conferences, but because our network is strong, one thing we can be really good with is communications, and then we can give them information about touring artists, and we also can let agents know that some of these festivals are quite viable and a good play for people, even if they're not seen at the conferences. So we can essentially provide those links. I think the other thing is that I guess it is like connecting with different networks. So sometimes I may not know, for instance, there might be a tango festival in Calgary, or a smaller Latin American festival, or a series of house concerts that I may or may not know about, but I could help direct people to, if I have those contacts within certain regions. Because like Michael said, sometimes there are very formal large festivals and venues, and sometimes they're informal. There are house concerts in Canada that can be really awesome. And so sometimes I think it's a matter of just trying to network and know that if there might be somebody that would be really supportive between shows, that would put on a show that might make you more money and get you a better audience than playing at a cafe that holds 150 people. So I think it's just keeping your ears and eyes open and looking for unusual places and networks and people that aren't part of a formal or professional situation.
Well,
But
Kerry and Michael,
communication, that's what it is, and that's what you're doing now. It's all about communication and people's time to communicate. I hear so many times someone said, "Oh my God, you sent me an email back," and it's like so many times people don't hear anything. So it's a human lack of communication, I think, sometimes with humans, and time that it takes, and valuable communications and meaningful. It's all about that communication.
fantastic, Kerry and Michael. Well, we are about to finish this conversation. We have 1 minute left. Perhaps someone has something to say or to add. If not, I want to thank you, Michael and Kerry, for this wonderful conversation. Thank you for your time. We will be in contact. Please, we will be in contact with you. We can, if you will allow us, we can share your email with the network. And we keep connected. For the rest of the group, some of us are going to be at Vime Pro next week, which is a music conference. Kerry, I don't know if you know it, but it's like it's an interesting conference because it's originally from Spain, so they are trying to connect Europe with Latin America. So anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Many thanks for this, and really looking forward.
Thank you very much for having us. I appreciate it. Muchas gracias.
And for the rest, for the network, solo decirles muchas gracias. Vamos a, pues, la siguiente, bueno, vamos a darnos, bueno, creo que la siguiente sesión será dentro de un mes. vamos a pausar un poquito o poner un poquito más de espacio entre nuestras reuniones y llamadas. Pero bueno, les mantendremos informados vía las newsletters, también vía el WhatsApp. Y bueno, vendremos pronto con más noticias y novedades. Muchísimas gracias por su tiempo.
Gracias a ustedes. Thank you.
Gracias.